For 20, 30 years, it was the political arena, the two-state solution, negotiations. We're done with that. We're done with that.
During Israel's bombardment of Gaza, Dr. Husam Zomlot rose to prominence for challenging the media's narrative on Palestinians. Currently serving as the Palestinian ambassador to the UK, Dr. Zomlot previously served as the head of the PLO mission to the United States before it was forcibly shut down by the Donald Trump administration. I do want to ask, Palestinian diplomats, including yourself, they constantly cite what they call international complacency with Israel as the root cause to what's happening to the Palestinian side. Now, when you have the U.S., the Biden administration approving the sale of $700 million plus in arms to Israel, when you have major global powers saying that they have unwavering support for Israel's right to defend itself, how do you really change the status quo?
It's a bottom-up approach, and it's really taking a long time, but it is primarily relying, connecting, engaging the people in America, the people in the UK, the people in Europe, the people in the world. And what we have seen over the last few months, particularly over the last few days, is absolutely inspiring, to say the least. This is an unprecedented momentum in terms of its energy, diversity. This is not just the Palestinian communities outside or the Arab communities or the Muslim communities, but I have seen in demonstrations people from Far East Asia, people from all over the world demonstrating for the rights of the Palestinians. We need to make sure that this will continue. It will be strengthened, this momentum, because sometimes it could be seasonal, as an emotional. People really their emotions pours out when they see the injustice right on their TV sets, but then things dies down. We don't want that to happen. We want the momentum to continue, and we want also to translate this momentum into political decision-making process, i.e. into concrete action by their governments. And this brings me to your question about the US and the UK. And for instance, on Monday, this coming Monday, there will be a debate in the UK Parliament to discuss imposing sanctions on Israel. This is unprecedented. But the reason why the Parliament was forced to do such a debate and to confront the UK government is because of a petition that more than 380,000 British citizens signed for their government to impose sanctions. Therefore, the power of the people is a very, very important side of our activism and of our work.
How do you keep it? You're saying it's a bottoms-up approach, but you also framed it that it's seasonal. So how do you make sure that it's not seasonal?
By being very concise and by being focused and by knowing what you ask for. And this time we are. So number one is sanctions. Sanctions have been created in the international system, so countries have to understand that there is a certain way of behavior, that no one is above the law, that there is no such a thing as impunity. So when a country violates these rules, like the main rule of the international system, the international law, is the inadmissibility of acquiring land by force. This is the key. And part of that system is that any country that does trespass on these rules would be punished via sanctions. So first is sanctions. And we are very clear that you start with embargo of exporting weapons, arms embargo, because these bullets, these bombs end up in the bodies of our children. And this is not what we are saying, this is what your cameras are conveying to the world. And if you need any proof of the atrocities that are being committed through some of your weaponry, then just go to Save the Children, go to the UN institutions, see the numbers. More than 70 schools in Gaza were damaged in the last aggression. Israeli aggression. More than 13 or 14 hospitals, if I remember very accurately, were damaged in the last aggression. And therefore, arms embargo is crucial. And this is not just a Palestinian demand. This is a British responsibility, and it is an international obligation. Obligation in front of the international system and law and commitments, and also local laws. The UK law is very clear. The British law stipulates that the government shall not export weapons to countries that violate international law. So this is a legal responsibility. And by the way, answering your question, we are leveraging the situation now not just in the political arena. For 20, 30 years, it was the political arena, the two-state solution, negotiations. We're done with that. We're done with that. We have negotiated enough, 30 years. Now we are saying international resolutions are not up for negotiations. They are only up for implementation. Number two, recognition of the state of Palestine. While sanctions will help the Israeli public changing its popular course, its popular tendencies, you know, for the last 2 years, Israel has convened 4 elections. 4 elections in 2 years. And in these 4 elections, the issue of Palestine, an entire nation, equal in size, by the way, we are equal in number, did not factor an iota in the Israeli elections because the Israeli public is indifferent. Completely indifferent. Why the Israeli public is indifferent? Because there are no consequences. There are no costs associated with the illegality. It's almost a culture of we can have the cake and eat it too. So this brings me back to the issue of recognition. Why recognition is important? Because recognition will give a message, a straightforward message, first to the Palestinians that countries like the UK and the US are serious. They are not just giving us lip service. And it will give a degree of hope that we are going in that direction, that Palestinian statehood is not up for negotiations, and Israel has no veto power over statehood and independence for the people of Palestine.
When you call for arms sanctions, when you call for an arms embargo, I mean, that's very easy to say, but the reality on the ground is the stipulations that you spoke about isn't just in the UK. I mean, it's shared by many Western countries, yet arms sales to Israel still go through with no issue. At the same time, in terms of Israel implementing international resolutions, Israel doesn't implement any UN resolutions based on the fact that it's non-binding. So how do you really get out of this whole cycle?
The law is very clear. There are no gray areas like in politics. The UK is committed, responsible, not to export arms to countries that violate international law. Do I need to prove to any British judge that Israel violates international law? I think even I, with very little knowledge of law, can prove it. So this is a very key area. But this isn't just about arms embargo. It is very important. It's number 1 on our list because this is the most vulgar way of supporting Israel right now, and we will not accept it. But there is the ban of settlement products. You say that settlements are illegal. That's the official UK position for all these years. You say that these settlements have to stop, and you say that you consider all of their activities to be illegal. So why do you import their products? We will utilize the legal system here, and we will make sure that the law of this land is fully applied on the government. And not only that, you gave visa waiver to Israel, to the Israelis. You know, Israelis can visit the UK, visit Europe, visit the US without a visa. Many other countries. Do you consider illegal settlers who live in occupied territories to have the same rights? What on earth would make a Palestinian like the Kurd family? Mona el-Kurd. She is required to have a visa to visit the UK. But the settler that is threatening to take her home can come to the UK without a visa. What law is this? And this is exactly where we are focused. We are not just focused on, generic things, let's call them overall things. Now we are focused on specific things. Companies, British companies that work illegally in these illegal colonial settlements deep in the occupied territories. What they are doing is illegal. What they are doing is criminal. We know these companies. One of them is JCB. JCB is a company that provides tools, equipments to build these illegal settlements. But answering your question in one sentence, we are being very focused, very detailed in our list of demands, and now we are working with our allies in the UK, elsewhere, to make sure that we actually pinpoint it and focus on it and get it achieved, even if it takes time. But for a long time, this whole discussion about the two-state solution has been so hollow, so undefined, so elusive, if I may use that term, elusive. We support the two-state solution. Thank you. But how did you support the two-state solution? Did you stop the demise of the two states? Did you stop Netanyahu of putting the final nail in the peace process? You didn't. So this is a time when you don't give me just statements. This is a time when you give us concrete action.
You've said that Britain has a responsibility towards the Palestinians. Historically, of course, in reference to the Balfour Declaration and what came after it. But do you think it has a responsibility today? What's the UK government's responsibility today towards Palestine?
There is a moral responsibility, historic responsibility, because of the Balfour Declaration. That declaration has promised our land without consulting us to others. And that declaration has promised our land when we, in fact, were a thriving nation, a thriving society. And then the British colonial arrogance and imperial arrogance decides to give way and to actually establish, as they said in these 67 words, a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And guess what? The rest of the 67 words, and to respect the religious and civil rights of the local population. We, the Palestinian people, ancient we are, we have almost produced every prophet. We were reduced into a minority that has civil and religious rights. Guess what, Muhammad? Until this day, Israel and behind it some world powers still believe that we only deserve civil and religious rights. So absence from the UK since 103 years ago, 104 years ago already, absence from the Israeli collective mindset. And by the way, let's not give Netanyahu more than he deserves in history. This is not just a Netanyahu. Even Rabin, who signed the Oslo Accord, never really accepted the very idea of a sovereign, independent Palestinian state. All of them thought of us as a minority that might be given some rights. The idea here is that they might improve our conditions in the present, but never to be liberated from the present. And that's what we're telling the UK government here, is what we need is a very clear, if you want to correct the Balfour Declaration, in addition to apologizing for this industrial scale suffering that happened to our nation over 100 years. 100 years! Ongoing Nakba, it never stopped until this hour.
What about the British opposition? What did you think of the Labour Party's response to the Israeli bombardment on Gaza?
Yeah, we expected more of our friends in the Labour Party. We expected the clarity of position about the atrocities that Israel has committed against our people. We expected more in terms of policy lines. We expected the Labour Party and the leadership to come out clearly about arms embargo, about banning settlement products. However, we recognize the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, letter to Prime Minister Johnson, asking him to actually discuss immediately the issue of recognition of the State of Palestine and to put it on the G7 table today. We recognize that. That's a good step by the Labour leadership. But much more is needed if we are really serious about reversing all these atrocities and beginning a real course of genuine peace. Labour is expected to do more, not because we criticize Labour, but we expect much more of Labour.
What about the United States? I mean, certainly any hopes for Palestinians was quashed under the Trump administration when he moved his embassy to, the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, when he shut down the Palestinian mission, which ended up forcing you to leave the country. What does the PLO expect from a Biden administration after everything that has shifted under the Trump administration?
We expect them to actually reverse all that was done by Trump. That's the number.
Do you think that will happen?
Well, you asked me about our expectation because Trump has just simply copied all the fantasies and the fallacies of the far right-wing Israeli political manifestation. So yes, I think this is against the very interest even of the US, and no one knows it more than Biden and his team. We do expect that. What Trump did was nothing more than being part of the settler movement, not even Israel. We believe that the time for US monopoly over mediation is over. The US has tried for a long time, 30 years. The US has sponsored almost solely peace processes since 1991, the Madrid process, Oslo process, and what followed. The main lesson here, the US is needed but it cannot do it on its own. Because Israel in the US is not a foreign policy issue. Israel in the US is a domestic issue. And how much different new administrations will be, how much will and desire with any US president for resolving the issue, they will always be pulled back by the dynamics in the US. And that's why to balance it, you need the rest of the world. And you need the rest of the world to bring a momentum, not to negotiate. Don't tell me let the two sides negotiate. This is really something that has been tried for a long time. The two sides means that you leave the wolf with the lamb. That's what it means. And the two sides means that with this huge asymmetry of power, then all what you are going to do is to allow Israel to continue the veto power over international resolutions. So we want to end this US sole mediation, and we want to end this two sides bilateral negotiations. What we need now is multilateralism, and this multilateralism is not there to negotiate but to find ways to implement international resolutions.
What do you think Netanyahu's legacy is regarding Israel and Palestine?
Netanyahu's legacy is two things. He's the one who has put the real nail in the coffin of the peace process, destroyed it. And also, he's the one who has helped the world to reveal the true situation in Israel. He is the one who really exposed Israel as it is.
You're highly critical of Netanyahu, but when you have someone like Naftali Bennett, in 2013, he said that he will do everything he could to not let a Palestinian state exist. How do you really expect someone who doesn't believe in your own self-determination to eventually let you have a Palestinian state?
We don't expect much. We don't expect anything, to tell you the truth. But this is not about Bennett or about Netanyahu. It's primarily about the Israeli public. It's primarily about the Israeli public failing to elect leadership, giving a serious, clear, popular mandate to a new leadership that would take Israel and would take us and would take the region and the world to a different direction. The Israeli public so far has been shifting to the right and to the right and to the right and to the right, all the way to the Kahanist movement now, all the way, when the Kahanist movement was actually on the terrorist list of the US and Israel. It was illegal. So what we need to focus on is not what are we going to do with Bennett and what Bennett will do. The key issue here is how do we change the public sentiments in Israel. So far, and I don't speak about every Israeli, I speak about the mainstream. So far, for the mainstream, they are completely indifferent about this gross violations of our rights. And therefore, the main question here is, okay, Naftali Bennett now is the prime minister. It's a very slim minority, majority, I mean, one seat. I don't know if this government will last for a long time. But the key question in front of us, in front of the international community, is how do we help the Israeli public steer in a different direction? That's the key question. And that brings the discussion about sanctions, about consequences, about accountability. Because without that, I think the majority of the Israeli public is very comfortable, and they will keep reproducing the Bennetts and the Kahanists and the settler movement, because Bennett himself was the leader of the settler movement. And by the way, we have done our bit. What happened over the last few weeks and months by our own people, I think, has delivered a clear message to Israel, to the mainstream Israeli mindset, that the fallacy that the Palestinian people and the Palestinian issue has gone somewhere is not anymore on the table. Remember the Abraham Accords, and remember all the normalization. Remember what Netanyahu was telling them, as if the Palestinian issue has evaporated. The Palestinian people has managed to deliver to the very psyche of every Israeli that not only we are on the table, we are the table itself. Our great leader, Faisal Husseini, once said a line that I really appreciate and like very much. He said, Israel is busy creating facts on the ground, and we are the facts on the ground. We are the facts on the ground.
This past month showed a strong level of Palestinian unity on the ground. But there was also a level of anger directed at the Palestinian Authority and directed at President Mahmoud Abbas. We've seen voices also calling for reform in the PLO. There's been a letter that was signed by Palestinian academics calling for President Mahmoud Abbas to step down from Fatah, to step down from the PLO, to step down from the PA. What do you make of this sentiment?
Well, anger doesn't serve us at this point in time. We need to really utilize this moment of unity to make sure that our representation continues to be legitimate and our representation is central, that this isn't about some sharing of the pie between political parties. In the end, Palestine has a seat in the UN as a state. The government of that state is the Palestine Liberation Organization, is the PLO. That PLO is recognized worldwide. Our office here, our embassy, our mission in London is the PLO mission, for your information.
Sure.
The world recognizes the PLO as the legitimate representative of the Palestinians, not the PA, because the PA has internal duties, not external. And that people have one.
But surely you have a view of what's going on.
And that people have one flag. My view is, no matter what, we need to make sure that the Palestinian national institutions remain intact and far away from internal political upheavals and pleasure and displeasure. The PLO was the product of our people's resistance. We did not fly a flag in the heart of London or the heart of Washington or Brussels for nothing. We need to make sure that our efforts, our calls for renewal, our calls for democratic process, all that is done, but we don't behave like a child. You know, when you're angry, you destroy your own toys. So we need to be calm. Yes, the calls for reform are important. Yes, the PLO needs to engage in elections. There were supposed to be elections, postponed for real reasons. For real reasons. Jerusalem is the Palestinian campus. And Israel, Netanyahu wanted to use that opportunity to pocket Jerusalem. But this does not mean we should stop or we should defer permanently the elections. Elections must be held as soon as possible.
Do we have a sense of when the elections will happen?
The parties are convening now. Egypt is inviting all political parties to engage in such a dialogue, and everybody realizes that we do need elections as soon as possible, yes.
In hindsight, if we look back at everything that's happened in the past month, do you think that it was maybe a mistake to postpone the elections?
Well, this is a legitimate discussion about when should elections happen. Yet, I think, my opinion is that convening elections without ensuring that these elections will happen in what you want to be your capital. And what is your capital? I mean, we own every house, every shop, every mosque, every church in Jerusalem. This is not something we claim from above. This is something we own. While I understand some of the criticisms that we needed elections anyway, no, we cannot have elections anyway. The bottom line is, there were letters sent to Israel by us to commit and to fulfill its own commitment according to the agreements we signed to allow for national elections. You see the key word, national elections in Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, the occupied East Jerusalem, as happened in 2006, 2005, and 1996. There were letters sent to Israel by the European Union, by many international actors. Israel never responded. This is their way to hijack your process, to make sure that elections will not happen in Jerusalem without actually answering. Israel answered by deeds, not by words. They didn't send us a letter. They sent their soldiers, their army, their police to round and to arrest anyone who dared to start campaigning in Jerusalem. And I'm sure you have followed that. You've seen that. So it was absolutely obvious, clear, that Israel will torpedo, will block elections in Jerusalem. So what do? The best thing is to make sure that elections will happen. If they are national elections, they should happen in the entire Palestinian areas. And now is to push for a fast process whereby you ensure these elections and you declare a new date.
There's that argument, but there's also another argument that it was postponed because there was a chance of Fatah losing the election.
I don't think so. And personally, I think that when President Abbas announced the elections, it took everyone at a surprise. No one expected it. No one. Not the Americans, not the Israelis, not the region, Arab world, and not even some Palestinian political factions. Hamas did not expect that he will announce elections. So there was no such pressure to announce elections. I believe that our president wanted to convene elections because he knows that elections will far exceed just a democratic process. Important it is, proud we are of our democratic process, but for us elections would serve two other important functions other than just renewing our political system, which is important. I mean, bringing in new leadership, very important and needed and must happen. But there are other two crucial functions. The first is end the division between Gaza and the West Bank, unite the political system. It's very important. 15 years, enough. Okay. Nothing has really harmed the Palestinian issue and caused more than this self-inflicted wound. And the third, elections for us. And that brings the issue of Jerusalem and why we postpone it. Election is a resistance method. Elections is a resistance tool. Remember, we are under occupation. We are not a sovereign, independent state, only to do elections for the sake of changing politicians. When we do elections in Jerusalem, we reaffirm our presence, our claim, our capital in Jerusalem. And the moment we stop doing that, then elections in itself becomes the goal rather than the tool. However, this does not mean we should not convene elections. I just described how crucial elections is in the Palestinian context, and I am hoping that elections will be convened in the earliest, absolute earliest opportunity possible. This is what the Palestinian president wants, this is what the PLO wants, and this is definitely what the Palestinian people want and deserve. It's their right. They have to decide who should be in the leadership next.
In a recent interview with Middle East Eye, Khalid Mash'al said that the status of Hamas has been bolstered within the Palestinian leadership. He also said that Hamas is now currently, quote, leading the Palestinian struggle. What do you make of that? And what do you make of the rise in Palestinian support for Hamas that we've seen in the West Bank after recent events?
It would be very unfortunate if any Palestinian political faction sees some sort of a monopoly of struggle and a monopoly of resistance. That would be a very bad reading of the mood and the mindset of the Palestinian people. The mood of the Palestinian people, be it in Jerusalem, be it in Gaza, be it in Lud and Yafa and Haifa, be it in Ramallah and Hebron and Nablus, be it in refugee camps in Lebanon and Syria and Jordan, be it in the diaspora and the refugees outside here in Europe. You've seen hundreds of thousands of them all over. The mood among the entire Palestinian people is that of unity. That of unity. Of the unity of the nation, the unity of the purpose, the unity of the suffering. And if one faction wants to portray this as a win for all, for it, that's a very bad reading, and I recommend for them not to do that, because that will lose them popular support. This is about us all. We are all in this together. This is about our national ship. That ship is sailing towards one destination. That destination is ending the military occupation, is gaining our right of return back to our homes, and is gaining full equality. And that ship has got to be purely national, that we do not look beyond our territory, that we have no relationship with others. Our main focus is our people and our cause, and for that we employ everything. So I hope that there will not be one Palestinian faction or two that will reduce the 100 years of heroism from the revolutions of the 1919, the Great Strike of 1936, the revolution of Yasser Arafat and his colleagues and his brothers and sisters in 1965, the enforcement of the Palestine issue on the world stage, the speech of Yasser Arafat in the UN in 1974. And Yasser Arafat was not speaking on behalf of Fatah in the UN. He was speaking on behalf of the entire Palestinian factions, the entire Palestinian people, every political party, all the way to what happened in the last month, which started in Sheikh Jarrah, started in Jerusalem. We do not reduce this or employ this for political gains. This is not the moment. This isn't the moment. This is the moment when we employ all this for a political national gain for our people.
Young Palestinian voices speaking out in the media that we've seen over social media and whatnot. Some of them have been born after Oslo,
right?
And they don't align themselves with either Fatah or Hamas or anyone. They feel disenfranchised from the Palestinian leadership,
right?
And they feel like, after speaking with successive Israeli governments, there was still no end to their own struggle.
Right.
So what do you say to them today?
I say to them that the most important message is what you have already delivered. Those youngsters the youth of Sheikh Jarrah, the youth of the West Bank, the youth of Gaza, the youth inside 48 areas, and the youth outside here, they are all over. I mean, the level of engagement on social media, on traditional media, in the streets, the mobilization, writing to their MPs. I mean, you think the debate is happening in the UK Parliament? Why? Because of our youth leading the efforts to write to their MPs. Mm-hmm. I tell them what they have done is historic in every sense, and to stay on the course. Stay on the course. Not to be confused. Oh yes, there were mistakes in the past. There were many mistakes. But your parents and your grandparents have done a great deal of resistance. Your grandparents and parents have tried their utmost best. But the conspiracy against them, the conspiracy was so severe. It was a train that was meant to hit them, and that train was meant to crush them. They were meant to not to remain. The plan in the 40s, the plan was that we are no longer in the box of geography, that we will only be in the box of history. But we remained. Their grandparents and their parents might not have achieved the right of return or the right of self-determination or equality, but they have achieved the right of steadfastness, of remaining. And in every generation, we have done a lot to make sure that the world will listen to us. We have done a huge sound. No other cause has done this. Sound has become a very international. And this is not the first time the Palestinian issue is at the global stage. Their parents have done it too, and their grandparents have done it too. So while we need to learn from the mistakes of the past, we want to be loyal to our parents, to our previous generations, learn the lessons from the mistakes, but also build on the successes. Everybody negated us only 100 years ago in this very city we are sitting in, negated our presence, our existence as a nation. Yet today, I stand before you, I speak to you as the ambassador of Palestine. I represent the nation of Palestine and the people of Palestine. I don't represent a faction. I don't represent a tendency. I represent the collective Palestinian. This did not come out of nothing. It came out of blood and sweat and determination of generation after generation. So may they pick up from where we ended, and may they build on it.
My last question for you. So last month we've seen in London the biggest pro-Palestine demonstration in British history. An estimated 180,000 people came out. You were there, you spoke. What is the sense that you got from the people around you? And is Palestinian solidarity shifting in London and other Western cities around the world?
We see something new, yes, we see something new. This is not the first time we see demonstrations for Palestine or against Israel. But this is the first time we see the intensity and the diversity. The intensity, you see people are not just coming out to demonstrate. No. You see them writing to the BBCs and to the media outlets. You see them writing to their MPs. You see them going to the parliament itself. There is a mobilization that I think is promising, very promising. Diversity, because yes, I was a speaker at that demo. And you're right, I was looking at the tens of thousands and I saw the diversity. This was not just the Palestinian community. Important they are, they led the demonstration. Or the Arab community, they were there in abundance. Or the Muslim community. But this was such a diverse group of the human nations, the human family. I saw faces that come from Japan and China. I saw faces from Latin America. People who were coming with their flags. This is the Chilean flag and that is the Algerian flag. It was almost like a celebration of Palestinian resistance. And I think this is really something to build on. To build on with all these people, with the diversity and with the intensity, and again, to make sure that this momentum does not wane down. Because this is not the first time. There were so many situations of confrontations and atrocities before. There were so many demonstrations and emotional reaction. We don't want it to be emotional only. We want it to be principled, and we want to create out of this a force that will change things.